Most of us can agree that serial killers are very disturbed or just mentally insane. What were the reasons why these serial killers murdered? We may never know the answer. These 10 individuals you are about to see had no regard for human life. These are the top 10 worst American serial killers. Number 10. America's first serial killer. H.H. Holmes, also known as Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, was the first documented serial killer. Living in Chicago, Holmes opened a hotel in 1893 that was specifically designed for murdering his victims. He chose mainly female victims who were killed in various ways, which included being chloroformed, gassed, strangled, burnt alive, or beaten to death. After his arrest, he confessed to 27 murders, but his actual body count was over 200. On May 7, 1896, Holmes was hanged at what is now known as the Philadelphia County Prison. Number 9. Edmund Kemper. Also known as the Co-Ed Killer, Edmund is an American serial killer and necrophile who brutally murdered his victims during the 1970s in California. Having murdered his grandparents when he was only 15 years old, Edmund would later kill and dismember 6 female hitchhikers in Santa Cruz. Before turning himself into police, he murdered his mother and one of her friends. On November 1974, he was found guilty of 8 counts of murder. Edmund asked for the death penalty, but instead the court gave him a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 8. Donald Henry Gaskins. Gaskins started his series of murdering hitchhikers in 1969 while driving around the highways of the American South. He claimed to have killed 80 to 90 people whom he had tortured and mutilated. After one of his criminal associates confessed to having witnessed Gaskins killing 2 young men, he was arrested in 1975. Convicted of 8 murders, Gaskins was sentenced to death, which was later overturned to life imprisonment. While on death row, Gaskins murdered a fellow inmate. He's the only man to have ever committed murder while on death row. Number 7. Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer. Between 1974 and 1991, Dennis Rader murdered 10 people in Wichita, Kansas. When he started sending taunting letters to the police, he signed using the nickname BTK, which he says stood for Bind, Torture, Kill. Rader would stalk his victims, break into their homes, then bind and strangle them. He seemed to have disappeared in 1988, but re-emerged again in 2005. During this time, he was elected president of a church council and became a Cub Scout leader. On his return to the criminal lifestyle, he taunted police again, this time sending them a floppy disk instead of a letter. The police were able to trace this floppy disk back to Rader, who was then arrested and immediately confessed. He is currently serving 10 life sentences. Number 6. Richard Ramirez. Richard was known to be an American serial killer and Satan worshiper. Between 1984 and 1985, he terrorized Los Angeles. Ramirez would break into his victims' homes where he would then shoot, stab, rape, and mutilate his victims. Nicknamed the Night Stalker, Ramirez chose victims who ranged from a 9-year-old girl to a married couple aged in their 60s. He would smear pentagram symbols on the walls of the crime scenes. He was eventually caught in 1985 and was sentenced to death, although remained on California's death row for 23 years before dying in his cell in June 2013. Number 5. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was a sex offender and serial killer. Nicknamed the Milwaukee Cannibal, he raped, murdered, and dismembered 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. He would also commit necrophilia and would dismember, cook, and eat parts of his victims' bodies. Dahmer was eventually caught in 1992 when he was convicted of 15 murders and sentenced to 15 terms of life imprisonment. He died in prison 2 years later when he was beaten to death by a fellow inmate. Number 4. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was one of the most notorious serial killers of the 20th century. Bundy would kidnap, rape, and kill his female victims during the 1970s. He would typically approach his victims in public places and then lead them to quiet areas where he would sexually assault and murder them. He decapitated 12 of his victims and kept their severed heads as trophies in his apartment. After being caught, he managed to escape police custody, whereby he committed 3 more killings. He was eventually sentenced to death by electric chair in 1989. Number 3. John Wayne Gacy. Between 1972 and 1978, John Wayne Gacy sexually assaulted and murdered 33 teenage boys and young men in Chicago, Illinois. Luring his victims into his home with the promise of work and money, he would later strangle them with a tourniquet. He buried some of his victims in a crawl space under his home and dumped the bodies of his later victims in the Des Plaines River. Gacy was convicted of 33 murders and sentenced to death by lethal injection in 1994. Number 2. Tommy Lynn Selle. Known to be one of the most dangerous serial killers in Texas, United States, Selle claims to have killed 70 people. Between 1985 and 1999, he brutally murdered several people, including a 13-year-old girl. He was eventually caught after attempting to murder a 10-year-old girl in her bedroom. The girl survived the stabbing and managed to give police a detailed description of Selle, which led to his arrest. He now remains on death row in a high-security prison in Texas. Number 1. Gary Ridgway. In 2001, Ridgway was arrested for 4 murders throughout Washington state. He eventually confessed to killing at least 70 women during the 1980s and 1990s. He managed to avoid the death penalty by giving detailed confessions to the police and directing them to the locations of his victims. He was given the nickname the Green River Killer after leading the police to 5 bodies which he had dumped in the Green River. Convicted of 49 murders, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole.